know there's a lot to talk about. I wanted to start off with Manchester City situation, actually, because reports from the Times today believe that Manchester City have won their case against the Premier League for the associated party transactions, effectively stating that clubs should be able to receive exorbitant amounts of money from sponsors and organizations that are associated to the primary owner. So the Kroenke should be able to take loads of money from Walmart. Ineos should be able to pump untold amounts of money into Manchester United. There was meant to be a vote on that subject matter today. That has been cancelled abruptly, which has led the media to believe that Manchester City may have won this case. Panel, thoughts on this, if it is true that the associated party rules may change, leading to the likes of Newcastle or Manchester City potentially being able to pump exorbitant amounts of additional money into their teams?
The question I have is, wouldn't they need to change the whole rules that they brought into place with the new profit and sustainability stuff? Because then obviously that would allow teams to balance their books a lot easier. It would give teams, like you said, Newcastle, Man City, the opportunity to pump loads of money in as a sponsorship, and then their books balance out because they don't need to worry about wages and so on. And I just can't see how that would, like, how it does add up if that is the case. Definitely gives a huge advantage to the teams that have owners that are willing to invest, owners that want to win. And I guess teams like us, Tottenham and Liverpool and so on, who try to be sustainable, we'd be in the mud if that does get approved. So no, I'm all against it, definitely.
So is it basically bringing in external revenue streams into the club? So for instance, if you had another company, another £1 billion corporation, could you then pour money out of that into the club? Is that basically what the court case was?
So essentially, they're stating that the rules and regulations that restrict clubs from taking money from associated parties, they're essentially saying that's too stringent and that is stopping competition. That Newcastle would argue that it's stopping them from getting bigger sponsorship deals from companies that because these billionaires own loads of other companies, right? Or they're associated to loads of companies. They want to be able to bring these companies in to sponsor St. James's Park, to sponsor the shirts, so that they have more money readily available now. That's essentially what they're fighting for. And of course, the richer your owners and the more they're willing to invest, typically dictates how much money they're going to pump in.
This is a small story, in my opinion, but they're making it bigger because this is something that they can still revisit. It might be a short-term thing that they're not really, it's not been thrown out, Terry. It's not a complete victory for City. I swear they just got it off the table for discussion. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, so this is what they're stating here. It says Manchester City appear to have scored a victory over the Premier League on the APT T's, so the associated party transactions, after a vote to amend the rules was pulled at the last minute from this morning's meeting. So this morning there was a meeting amongst the Premier League teams, and they've pulled it as a subject matter instantly. So the belief is that if they've won this court case and essentially the judges have deemed that the rule is unlawful and it's restrictive of football clubs, again, this will have an impact on everything. So it may not change how much you can lose. It may not change the sort of limits on PSR, FFP, and the percentage of your income you can spend. But what it may now mean is that clubs can dramatically increase their income like this. Because theoretically, I'm sure that the owners who are worth 600 billion at Newcastle own a company that can now maybe afford to go, well, we'll pay you £200 million a year for a shirt sponsor. But because they can't under the current associated parties rule, because they're associated to their owners, the case is to try and essentially disband that rule.
Okay. And this has nothing to do with what's going on in July.
What's going on in July?
With their case, this is with their case in July, but not their ongoing.
No. So their current case is going on now. This case was in July. This is the one that was in July.
Okay, understood. Now,
but they think so. So to answer that before you speak, because you might be cross purposes here. The feeling is if City win this and they can prove that the APT rules were wrong and unlawful, a theory is this will help them in their current court case, because they can say, well, if your rules around us pumping money in are now deemed unlawful, how could you potentially punish us for breaking the rules that have now been deemed unlawful? Even though they're not breaching breaching FFP and PSR isn't in itself defended here. But if it's now deemed that they weren't able to increase their revenues by their associated parties, they think they might be able to use it in that case. Sorry, back to yourself.
I was just thinking, if they pulled the proposal being amended, then I'm just still, one thing I'm missing. If they've said that they've pulled this morning's meeting, they've pulled the amendment from the meeting, it still doesn't mean that it can't be amended in the future.
No, I mean, you are right. I mean, you could argue maybe the Premier League
is waiting until everything is sorted so they can make changes.
Yeah, I mean, or you could argue the Premier League has won and they've pulled it away because they're going to Premier League and say, we're not going to make any fucking amendments. We've won the case. Just to let everyone know here. So this is what is claimed. So they claim that the APT rules, which are aimed to prevent clubs from penning inflated sponsorship deals with companies linked to their owners, were unlawful and claimed damages. A 2-week hearing was held, and the results of which are yet to be made public. City claimed the rules that were introduced in 2021. So again, these rules only started in 2021. Some people believe it's going to create a case for their 115 trial. Personally, I don't see the correlation, because these are for rules that started before any of those charges were being investigated. But that's what some people say. Introduced in December following the Saudi-led takeover of Newcastle United, were aimed at ending their success on the field and described as a tyranny of the majority. So that's all to do with that. What's your thoughts on it, Ram?
My thoughts, again, is a small fish in a very, very large pond. I'd say there's so much more to go off of at City. Look, there's 115 charges that they got, but the way that things are moving at the moment, and the way that the amount of money that the club has put in to fight all these charges, I feel like there's going to be a lot of successes, but there may be a couple of failures, and in the end, they'll get hit with a petty fine. I don't think anything else will happen. I don't think they're going to get a points deduction. I don't think they're going to get stripped of any of their titles.
Yeah, hang on. So let me just jump in again. This is nothing to do with the 115. What do you make of clubs like Newcastle, who are worth 600 billion, now being in a position where if this is the case, they can now have sponsorship deals, which means within a year they can go from making 300 million a year turnover to maybe making more than Real Madrid because of a new shirt sponsor? Is that good or bad for the game, in your opinion?
Oh, I don't think it's good. I think clubs should build their models in a more sustainable way. I think it's basically going back to what Chelsea and Manchester City did back in 2008 and 2005. And certain clubs, I mean, Tottenham, for example, they weren't the biggest, but somehow they become the biggest because they had to work their way through it, and they've built a very good marketing campaign.
Wouldn't you argue that our clubs, because look, again, we're Tottenham and Liverpool fans, we know that our clubs sort of built out sustainably, but wouldn't you just argue that the owners aren't ambitious enough? And to be honest, like, owners shouldn't be stopped, or that their ambition shouldn't be halted by certain rules. I'm just trying to see both sides of the coin here. If the owner wants to invest, the owner wants to put money into the club, should
they be doing it legally?
But then it works. It works both ways, though, because if they could put money into their club to build the infrastructure, whatever, that's great. But when it comes to other clubs, like, what about your Brentfords? What about your Brightons, who have been trying to do it in a more sustainable manner, not having billionaire owners, but still trying to compete?
You shouldn't be able to get a shirt sponsor that's higher
those
than
kind of clubs won't get there. Those kind of clubs won't be able to go and challenge for Europa or Europa Conference, because clubs like Newcastle will come along and just take that spot already because of the money.
I fully agree with you, Ram. Sorry to cut you off there. I was just going to say,
fine.
You shouldn't be able to get a shirt sponsor more than Manchester United, Arsenal, or Liverpool if you're Newcastle right now. And with this potential rules, they will be able to do that. And if that's the case,
why shouldn't you?
If that's the case, no, because you shouldn't. It should be relative to what the fair market value is. Because then, what's stopping a team from getting promoted and then getting a new shirt sponsor of the level of a Manchester United or Arsenal? That's just not fair. Like, I get it that they have.
At the
I
same
get it
time,
that they have.
But saying it's not
business-
fair and saying that it shouldn't be is two different things, because it
No,
might
because
not
there
be
should
fair,
be
but
certain rules and
also-
regulations about how much money you can bring in, especially if your club is not valued to that level. It's almost like it's money laundering at that point. Legal or a way of trying to get money into a system which is not necessarily a value for what that thing is.
I understand that argument. I'm going to say, look, I'm going to put this up on the screen so you guys can all see it. This is the current from top to right from the top Newcastle. So Newcastle's owners are worth 620 billion. They dwarf all of their owners. Now, as a Man United fan, I am not worried about this situation. I think Ineos won't mind this because I think Ineos want to pump money in. And Ineos, Man United's owners are the second wealthiest owners in the league. Okay. The majority of that 20 billion is Ineos levels, right? You've got Aston Villa. I think their owners will like this. Man City's owners, they're at 16 billion, will like it. Chelsea's owners will like it and they'll pump more money in. Then you start getting to the rest. By the way, Arsenal, 12 billion. West Ham, worth 10 billion. You've got Liverpool's worth almost 10 billion. They all have the money to increase their revenues. I've got no issues with it from that point of view. The only element where I do feel a bit concerned. So again, as a Man United fan, this is kind of good news for me because I think Ineos could suddenly become our shirt sponsor, which they can't right now. Pay off our debts, spend more money. Great. Love it. The problem I have with it is unless you get someone buying your club who's worth 10 plus billion pound, you could get to a stage no matter how well you're run, no matter how good your due diligence is, no matter how great you run, how brilliant your academy is, you may never be able to start growing up that ladder because because the richest people in the world own football clubs and will just outspend them by. I still think there has to be a cap on it, and also where you've got to be careful. And this is where the clubs have to be sensible. Let's say Man United get a new shirt sponsor from Ineos that's worth £400 million a year. Suddenly our revenues go from 600, 700 to 1.1, 1.2 billion. And we go, do you know what? We're going to go and buy Mbappe with that money. And we're going to go and buy, I don't know, Tchouaméni for that money. And we're going to go and buy Saliba from Arsenal. And we're going to break the bank and we're going to buy these players. It's great. What then happens to Man United if, for whatever reason, Ineos goes bankrupt, so Jim pulls out, and we're suddenly left with these players who are on 5-year deals earning £1 million each a week. And now, when you look at it without this shirt sponsor, because Ineos have gone bankrupt or the owners pulled away, we've got this huge debt that could put us out of business. That is the only element where I still think the Premier League clubs have got to be sensible. So I feel for the smaller clubs because it doesn't, everyone says they've got to show ambition. I was just looking at the ownership levels now. Some clubs in the Premier League owners are worth about 200 million, which to you and I is rich. But compared to Liverpool's owners at 9 billion, they're poor. Retrospectively looking at this, it's going to stop teams. It's going to stop teams doing what the likes of Brighton have done. If the money is well spent by these football clubs, it will kind of stop that. The other element I worry about is owners spending lots in the beginning, increasing the revenue and spending loads, and then changing their mind later on down the line and leaving clubs in destitute situations, because that's happened before. We've almost seen clubs go out of business for 50, 60 million pound of debt. Imagine what a wage bill with, I don't know, £1 billion of debt on it would do to a football club. That's my only concern for me personally.
I feel as though when it comes to all this stuff, the Premier League has marketed this whole league as competitiveness is one of the biggest things. Yeah, I feel with this kind of move, it will just turn into what the Premier League was 10 to 15 years ago, where it was Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, United, then the rest of the Premier League. And that's what I feel this kind of thing will move. It will move to two extremes. The clubs that have billionaire owners who are already established, whose values around about in the high billions. But then you've got the rest of the clubs like your Brightons, your Forests, your Brentfords, who are a couple of 100 millions, but they're never ever going to bridge that gap
Thing
because
is,
they're
though,
just
Ram, I
so
don't
far
think
behind.
10, 15 years ago that there was a massive gap due to the financial, how
But
big financially the top 4 clubs were. I would look at it saying the Premier League itself didn't have the marketing, that the rest of the teams, the other 16 teams, like you said, they couldn't pull big players in from Europe like you're seeing now, where Nottingham Forest are going to La Liga and European clubs and pulling players from them. They didn't have that pull.
But that's to do. But that was to do with. But that was to do with money. It wasn't until around 2013-14 that the TV deal money jumped up from like 1 billion to like 6 billion pound being split.
Oh, Elon Musk's again.
I thought that was
He's at it again.
That is, someone screenshot that.
That's flattering, man. It's
You know, you can hear
It absolutely gets on my nerves. It's weird. It's certain days. Some days it's perfect for like 2 hours. Other times it's not. But yeah, as I was saying, the clubs were getting 20 to 30 million pound a year in TV money, even the biggest clubs. Then it suddenly jumped up to 150 million. The wealthiest clubs at the time were the teams that you would consider that traditional top 4, as they were dubbed. They just had exponentially more money. The reason why you've seen it out in the last decade, partly some of those clubs have been run poorly, like Man United, and everyone else has got more money. What you started to notice was teams were able to hold on to their better players for longer because they suddenly had the money to. They didn't have to say, oh, you know what, Chelsea have offered us 60 million. We don't have to say yes anymore. We're getting 150 million a year in TV money. This rule, if it isn't capped to a certain point, could lead to that. And the irony in it is this: the Newcastle fans and the City fans that say, yes, the death of the red cartel. You do realize in 10 years' time, people are going to look at you in that same look, in that same way. Newcastle and City will be at the top. If Man United are well run, financially, we're going to be okay. Villa look like they'll be all right. Chelsea look like they're going to be all right. It's everybody else. And I actually get your point, George, that if your owners aren't ambitious enough, but they've got the money, that's on them. The ones I feel sorry for are not the Tottenhams and the Arsenals or the Liverpools, whose billionaire owners don't put money in. I feel sorry for the Brightons and the Brentfords and the Lutons who get promoted, who don't have owners that can't put that kind of money in. It almost becomes impossible for them to ever get to that level if it's based on your owner's wealth rather than a big percentage being based on your success. So I do see it from their point of view, but if this court case has gone through, I don't see how it's going to be capped. If that rule is considered unlawful, we are going to see uncapped sponsorship deals, and it's going to change everything again.
Do you not think the league will essentially be like a fouled system in terms of the 3 that will come up will be the same 3 that will go back down? It'll be, I mean, at the moment, it's probably the hardest, I would say, is to stay up from a promoted team right now. I know we've seen Brighton's break in.
I think it depends on who. I think it depends on who the team is. I think it depends on who they are, how well they're run, and how big they are. So, Leeds United getting promoted, it's easier for them to stay up because they've got a much bigger fan base than it is a Luton. So there's naturally more money, and again, it depends how wealthy their owners are. So there's an element of truth. I think it's all going to come down to how well you're run and how rich your owner is. If these rules come in where spending can become almost uncapped, or it's a percentage of your earnings, but theoretically you can just go, we'll sponsor. We sponsored the left arm 20 million. We're going to sponsor the right arm 100 million. We're going to sponsor the front of the shorts 30 million, the back of the shorts 50 million, with companies that are all set up by the owner that don't really. That's what I worry about. Is it becomes a mockery? Does that make sense? You know, that would be my worry, that it becomes a mockery. And I just hope that they put practices again. These rich clubs, mine are one of them. But a lot of these rich clubs also have to understand you need to be protected from yourself a little bit, because you could end up in a situation where huge debts are run up against your club.